Welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And we'll just give it a minute or two for people to continue to join this session. So in the meantime, I will post this in the chat just to invite you to think about this. We cordially invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, all the participants. So I'll just post that there now so that you can see and think about what you want to write. Just give it a minute still. You can start to write it if you like. Give it a minute before posting so that more people can be in the room and can actually read you. So what we like to invite you to do is to change your profile, if you like, to your name and organization so that we know who's in the room and people can know who's there and refer to you even. And also, if you would like, you are warmly invited to introduce yourself in the chat. So write your name, your country, your organization, if you want, and if you would like to, your connection to agriculture or food. And if possible, do all that in one message, adding as well, if you like, your social media, your website, your LinkedIn. And we will invite you to do this at the end as well, so that anyone who comes in late can also do that. And yes, we invite you to be brief with that. And just while we're waiting, you can perhaps type that up for yourself. Yeah, great to see so many people in the room. Some farmers that we know from the EARA farmer membership, which is great. And also people who've been time and time again to these roundtables, which is fantastic. A reminder that they are recorded, so you will be able to watch this later, which is great. And yes, we have also I see Natasha's here from the OT team, fantastic. She's been working hard to be able to take some time out and attend the session. And from the OT, we also have Virginia Tarditi with us and Simon Kramer. Special thanks to the two of them for being the ones who have been crafting this roundtable series all of these months. And we have our fifth OT member and farmer member. She wears both hats, which is Megan Sapp. She is not able to join us this evening because she's actually in Brussels doing all that important advocacy work there, taking the voices of the farmers there. So she sends her regards and best wishes for everyone. And she will watch the recording because she's very interested in this topic. Tonight's topic is of interest to everyone, and it's something that we are looking forward to educating ourselves in, because it's important to know about stuff before you can even express an opinion about it. And these are topics that are hot in the field. And speaking of heat, we're all hot with energy from last week's incredible second conference of the European Alliance of Regenerative Agriculture. We did that for a number of days in a castle in Germany. And it was just amazing to have together over 60 pioneering farmers from 20 different countries, continuing the work of making decisions and planning and debating and agreeing and developing strategy and future plans, and also drinking and eating and dancing and just creating community. And all of that warms our hearts for the OT, the 5 people I've just introduced who are in support and technical support to them. So it's just been amazing. So we're on that high vibe from that and really looking forward to the next phases of EARA, which brings together those pioneering voices of farmers into this important agri-food space. And part of the aim of EARA is also to offer these spaces of coming together and debating and learning from each other. Unity and diversity is EARA's motto, And so that's what this is also about. It's about bringing many voices together to understand and hear each other and walk this journey together, because it is a journey. So excellent. Let's invite you again to now for good to present yourself, introduce yourselves in the chat. People are already doing that, so fantastic. Please feel free to post that there when you're ready. Your name, organization, country, if you wish, and connection to agriculture and food. And if you want to drop your social media there as well, that's also very welcome. Super. So again, this session is being recorded. It will start to be recorded, I think. Is it already being recorded at this point?
Yes, Anna.
Great. Thanks, Virginia. Super technical support there always. And for the people who are present, who are from other countries, there's also people here present using technology appropriately, which is to have subtitles that are being done live as we go. So an invitation to everyone who's going to speak to be clear and to speak clearly so that even the people from other countries can actually understand and get the messages, the key messages through, thanks to subtitles, translated subtitles. So yes, this is a vibrant occasion. The energy is high, the sense of responsibility and of motivation for the next phases to come. Also, we're wrapping up an intense year for everyone, aren't we? And so setting the scene for the next year. So let us begin with introductions. Each of our guests will introduce themselves. And so I would like to ask, first of all, Mari Stewart, please tell us about yourself and your journey in your life and in regeneration in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and wonderful to be here. Thank you for including me in this group. So I'm Mari Stewart. I'm a regenerative agriculture program designer, and currently I'm head of regenerative agriculture at Matera, which is a UK-based direct cotton sourcing company. We work with farmers in India and then work with brands primarily in Europe that want to source their cotton from regeneratively managed land systems. So even though we work in India, I would say I'm firmly rooted in Europe, originally from Finland, currently living in Hamburg, Germany. And as I mentioned, Matera is based in Europe. So my journey has been somewhat unconventional to what I'm doing now. My first career was in academia, in the humanities, and I was the historian of South Asian religions and cultures, which proves useful now that I work in India and can go to India and meet farmers and speak Hindi with them and understand their cultural traditions. So it helps. But it was somewhat had many twists and turns. But in the last decade, I transitioned from being a scholar and researcher to working in regenerative agriculture. Again, took me a few years to pick up the different pieces of the training, and I am continuing to learn. I used to live in the US up until last June, so a lot of my work has been in the North American carbon farming, regenerative agriculture, and agroforestry world, including founding a locally, sort of regionally based sort of agroforestry-centered small carbon credit initiative in North Carolina. And so now I work with Matera and I work in textiles. So there's that textile industry angle as well. But in my previous role at Genesis International, also got to work with food and cosmetics industries and lots of different crops like palm oil, oats, coffee, and really understand the tremendous complexity in these industries. So the topic of tonight's discussion is really close to my heart, of how do we move from those commitments. Everyone wants to be able to say we support regenerative agriculture, but how in practice does that happen with today's extremely complex and long supply chains? So yeah, maybe one more word about Matera. It is somewhat unusual player in this space in that we are kind of a direct connection between farmers and then brands sourcing those raw materials and cotton So we currently work with almost 5,000 farmers across 3 states in India. These are primarily smallholder farmers growing cotton. So they work on 1, 2, 3 acres. And as many of you can imagine, they are, very accustomed to growing using conventional farming practices. So we're learning firsthand what the challenges are for these farmers to transition to regenerative, less intensive, less extractive farming practices. And we're seeing firsthand what the burden and the risk is on farmers, and finding an appropriate intervention that our company can play in supporting that, especially that initial first year's transition. So I'll pause there. I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone else. And yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful, Mari. Thank you. What a rich background there that you bring to the room. Thank you for working for small farmers and helping their lives easier and learning from them. Thank you. So over to Jérôme Dumont, who is from Belgium and is an arable farmer, one of EARA's farmer members, and very active there. So tell us, Jérôme, a bit about your story and your journey in this.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm Jérôme. I'm from Belgium. I work on the farm. It's a family farm, so I work with my 2 brothers and my father and my sister-in-law as well. So really a family business. And we produce mainly cereals, like the barley to make the good beers, good Belgian beers. We produce some fiber as well, flax. We try to produce some hemp. And it's hard to start something, but I think it will come one day to a good product in Belgium and in Europe as well. So we are in the regenerative agriculture from more than 30 years. My father started this long journey, step by step, and we really try to develop this way of farming because we find a lot of advantage, and we think it's the future. And so we try to help as well other farmers. I work with Regenerative in Belgium. It's like a small EARA, and it's always a farm-led organization. This was founded more than 20 years ago to help farmers to start this new way of farming. And I work as well with a French organization, BASE, funded by Frédéric Thomas, and the APAD. So we were well connected to try to work all together. And now we work with few agronomists as well to help some industry that want to change the practices and help the farmers. And because I think that now everyone understand that it's something that we have to do it all together, and not the farmer on one side and the industry on the other side. So I think that we're in a great moment now to try to develop that. And yeah, I think that's it for.
Thank you, Jérôme, and thank you for being such a pillar for so many things, and also for EARA, just like there, strong, rock fast. Thank you for that. And on to our next guest, Stefania. Please introduce yourself and your own journey in this regeneration ecosystem.
First of all, a really warm thank you that you've invited me. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm Stefania Mancini, and I'm Italian, and I represent here a coalition of agribusinesses. So probably the biggest food, beverage, textile, and cosmetic manufacturers. I'm happy to share then the link in the chat. They have united 5 years ago under a coalition called One Planet Business for Biodiversity, because 5 years ago they had understood, first of all, when thinking about their natural sourcing products, so that they're the impacts and dependencies on nature, and so the role that nature and biodiversity also play in agriculture and soil health. And they had also understood that the current incentive schemes and systems that they were actually promoting was destroying soil health, was destroying soil productivity. And so what is the role that we can play, as Jérôme was saying, to collectively try to influence the transformation of agricultural models so that they benefit farming communities, they create for us resilience in our value chains. So the That's also the business motivation why they're investing, and they also contribute to protect, restore, and regenerate nature and bring it back in agricultural value chains. And so also that's why we are probably one of those coalitions that have embraced the term of regenerative agriculture already 5 years ago, and said that this is probably a holistic solution that we can embrace to really try to transform our agricultural models over there. So, but Vero was saying it very nicely, because effectively the ones who are driving the transitions are all the farmers in the room. You're the one driving the transition. You are actually driving agriculture, and you're also at the forefront of all the economic shocks and climate shocks that we are unfortunately all facing, but you are just even more acutely exposed. And we have a very complex and fragmented agricultural system. And as Jero was saying it, there is a need to align, I think, the public and private incentive schemes, and also then, of course, aligned with pioneering farmers that are driving the transition. So us as a coalition of companies, I think what we have mostly tried to work on is, can we all as companies and primarily off-takers, what we call in the jargon, those buying the products, can we align on a shared impact monitoring framework? I can say a little bit technically. What I mean is, can we move from our disjointed company procurement asks that are sometimes different from each other to a comprehensive and shared impact monitoring asks in agricultural value chain? So what do we want to all measure at farm level, pay farmers for it, reward farmers for their results, and ultimately also then for us disclose in our corporate value chains? That's probably one of the biggest works that we have done. And that is relevant. Happy to share more about it. But what I'm really looking forward for is the next conversation. I would love to know, because as we can see, even in Europe, regenerative farming practices are really starting to pick up momentum. I think we might be between 10 and 15%. But to really shift, we need to reach probably 40 million hectares, which is approximately 40% of European production under regenerative and agroecological farming practices. And to reach that scale, we need a lot of finance and of public and private partnerships, much more people supporting it. So very, very interested to hear your thoughts, and also how we can support you. I'm a big personal supporter of European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, of EARA, because I think we need other and more progressive farmers' voices out there. So I'm very curious to learn, and so very much looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic, Stefania. What a great summary of what you're doing and what you would like to do to support pioneering farmers and to support their journeys. So looking forward definitely to that conversation. And a couple of more guests, because we should have Anne with us, also an EARA farmer, but actually she's sick. So she sends everyone her regards. She cannot be with us this evening. But we do have as farmers Jero and Anders, who is going to introduce himself next. And his thing is more about cattle, isn't it? And holistic management. Over to you, Anders.
Thank you, Anna. Just have to mirror what everybody else is saying. I'm really happy to be part of this roundtable. It's so important to get this happenings going now, building on the collective awareness so that we can build a better future. I am the 9th generation of our family farm, and I'm about to be kicked out of my own farm by my 13-year-old son at this moment. So I'm looking for retirement plans here. We used to produce potatoes and industry crops for McDonald's and other large-scale companies. And when I was supposed to take over the farm 10-15 years ago, I was standing in the field and seeing how everything was eroding. The social capital, the soil were eroding, the community around us were eroding, and we were basically going broke doing that. And we had the best machinery and the best equipment and everything. So I just got on the first plane to California and got in touch with everything that is regenerative agriculture. So that was back in 2007. And that put me on a path into holistic management, now being a savory professional, teaching farmers, trying to lead by example here in Norway, how to regenerate ecosystems while producing delicious food. also trying to rebuild a countryside community. It's not so funny to be a farmer that you can be isolated from people around you. So that's a really important part that we're working a lot with. And it also became a need for us to develop more structure and organization here in Norway and Sweden. So I've been part of building up organizations like Regenerative Norway, working with industry, policymakers and such in order to maintain the integrity of regenerative agriculture, something which started out as something farmers needed and now the whole world needs it. So we're trying to hold those who need to be held accountable, and so that we will grow in the best possible manner. Yeah, I think that was enough for now.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, for that. And another pillar within EARA who's also very much aware of the importance of human relationships and of caring for very clear agreements and the holistic vision of just also including the people side and the community side and the social side of things into it, which is a key element of regenerative agriculture for us. So thank you for caring for that for so many people. And last but by no means least, a voice that many know, at least you know the voice, Koen. Please tell us about your own journey in regeneration.
First of all, thank you for organizing and hosting this and for asking me to be here. I mean, I've been following the regenerative space relatively, short and long at the same time, depending if you've been farming differently for 20 plus years. Obviously, this feels short, but I stumbled upon, as a non-farmer born in the city center of Rotterdam, without any access to land and honestly no wish as well, like, which often people ask, like, when are you going to farm somewhere? Probably it's the worst thing that could happen for the land, because I don't know what to do, contrary to maybe some beliefs. Stumbled upon regenerative agriculture and food through an article in a book or a chapter in a book about 14 years ago, really through the lens of carbon at that time. And through the founders at that time of SLM Partners, Sustainable Land Management in Australia, and grazing, and really got triggered by the word soil, carbon, solution, all of that, and margins as well, and cost in the same sentences. I never thought food could be a part of the solution instead of just a smaller part of quite a dirty problem. Got hooked, started following the space, meeting people, and always wondered why we don't talk about investments and money and finance a lot in agriculture. It's one of the few sectors probably where that's often not a topic, while it should be, I think, because money is a tool. Money is a tool that can lead to great destruction, as we see around us, but can also be a tool to accelerate change. And I want to focus on the people that were doing that, like how to put money to work, how to regenerate soil, people, obviously, local communities and ecosystems. And about 8 years ago, more or less this month, actually, we uploaded the first episode on, I think, December 19th, 2016. Really, not as a joke, but never imagined what led to this, obviously, with just wanting to hang out with people building things in the space. The farmers wanting to do things beyond their own farm gate, the investors wanting to do things, the funders, the fund managers, entrepreneurs, larger companies, whoever was thinking about this at scale or at replicated scale, and the role of money. And it's just really good if you tell somebody, can I interview you, instead of can I brainstorm with you? If you say I'm recording, nobody asked about audience at that time, obviously. And that got a bit out of control. We're now 350 episodes in, and we've had the great fortune to talk with many of you that are building this space as we are going. Of course, it's exactly the right wave, and we're fortunate enough to capture a lot of the stories and have a microphone and be a sort of fly on the wall. And I get to ask all the silly questions that I'm curious about, because I'm not an economist. I never worked in a bank. I'm not a farmer, but I am interested in the role of money in this transition. And so we've been doing that. And on the side have been running a small investment syndicate, so getting our hands dirty, literally, with very small tickets, usually 2,000 euros here and there, into companies and into things. So I can put my money where my mouth is every now and then, which is great. And yeah, we feel really that we're at the beginning, although many people have been doing, of course, practices for a long time. But this food transition and food system transition is just getting started, and we're very fortunate that we can follow many of the deep thinkers and doers in this space.
It's definitely cool. Thank you so much for offering the space for so many voices that together are just building the tapestry of this, of the knowledge that is needed for this transition. So thank you for that. And we're going to begin now over to Simon for him to curate the conversation and start asking some interesting questions to our guest speakers. And feel free, our speakers, to ask each other stuff as well. So it's about a conversation between you. So feel free to open the mic and just say, hey, what about this? Put your hand up and ask for, yeah, just contribute to that juicy conversation, no doubt, because we have such amazing guests here. So over to you, Simon, to guide us through this.
Thank you so much, Anna, for guiding us so far, and thank you for the farmers for making us being able to be here, and for all the guests joining and all the other people following us. I wanted to start, as we are all, in the regen paradigm, with context and a little bit of historical context unfolding, so people really know how Regenact developed to become such a hot topic in supply chains and such a hot topic that Anders so well said we have to defend its integrity for almost all. And I thought by inviting Cone, as you said, 14 years you are following that space, maybe you can give us a brief historical evolution of the last 10 years in which you think how it developed from non-existence in major supply chains to being the hottest topic on the block. And you also said you think we're just at the beginning, so maybe you can just brush quickly what you think where we're going in the next 10 years.
And I have like 4 hours, right, to do that. No, I'm joking. I mean, the changes we've seen in the last years is simply, I think, 2 or 3-fold. I've seen it starting to show up on agendas of investors, because at the beginning, when I talked to any funders and investors, like soil, unless people were deep into food and agriculture, was really not a topic at all. Basically, you could see people glancing over, like, oh, let's talk about education or mobility or other like energy systems change, etc. And now that has shifted, still very minority, but at least it's in the larger investors and in the like on the agenda of people. Second, I think we've seen a lot more talent coming into the space, like people that are not necessarily farming but around it, that have been bitten by the soil bug somehow, and that's especially the last 2 years. People that have had successful careers elsewhere, that have built organizations, businesses, etc., and that somehow, usually, not usually, but often through personal health or somebody close to them that have gone through some kind of health crisis where food played an important role and the quality of food. I love the video, by the way, of one of the participants showing the evening walk and chores. Thank you very much. And that is just an influx of talent that not all can be farmers, which is okay. We need a lot of other roles around farming to enable farmers to hold more complexity. And then in supply chains, I've seen it going from like a non-word to a buzzword pretty quickly, actually, astonishingly quickly. I think 2 years ago, maybe some of you were there at the first, I remember the exact, I forget the exact name, but of a conference on Regen Ag, definitely more on the corporate supply chain side in Amsterdam around September. And that wouldn't have existed 4 or 5 years ago. It wouldn't have been even a possibility to rent quite a chic hotel actually for that, and was sold out, and there were protesters outside and all of that. And like 5 years ago, I don't think anybody bought it. I don't know why that is. I think partly marketing came into play. Like, this is something hot and sexy that might sell into certain, but I think there's a bigger underlying, and that I will get to your 10-year thing. I think we shouldn't underestimate it in many crops, not all, but in many contexts, this is starting to become a sourcing matter. So it's no longer in the CSR department, it's no longer in the marketing department. Maybe it will get at some point, but it's people sourcing. And there are many crops where weather weirding or weather strangeness is really hurting. Like, we've seen multiple failed crops in certain, multiple failed years in certain crops. We've seen a lot of it's starting to hurt. Like, it's starting to hurt in certain places, not everywhere. Some farmers are still doing absolutely fine in the conventional path, are still making more money than their regenerative counterparts, but in many other crops and areas, it's starting to hurt badly. And then you see of course, corporates waking up and supply chains waking up, because these supply chains, as they're changed, they're pretty weak. And if you haven't done a lot of investing, if you've been in the commodity market and just shopping around for the last 20, 30, 40 years, it's going to be quite, it's going to be quite painful if suddenly crops just disappear or suddenly whole regions cannot provide. Just if you look at olive oil prices currently in Europe after 2 field harvests in Spain, and there are many of these. So I think it's a mix of those. I think now with inflation and tightened budget, you see the CSR people maybe leaving slightly the room because there's less space. But I think the sourcing people, if they're serious, they cannot ignore the long term. Like if you want to keep sourcing for certain regions, certain crops, etc., you have to start investing, preferably yesterday and potentially now. So it's becoming like a financial discussion, like the financial head of companies discussion and sourcing discussion, and it will progressively become more of that over the next years and become a more diet change discussion and all of those, because it's just, I mean, we see it every summer and winter, and whatever hemisphere you are, we're being hammered by flood, drought, and fires, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
Thank you, Colin. Yes, I think by no means it's gonna stop anytime soon, and I think we're gonna come back to the sourcing issue versus the short-term cost issue later in our discussion. I wanted to pass to Mari. I'm also in Hamburg right now, by the way. Fun fact.
Oh, okay, didn't know that.
I wanted to ask from your experience, and maybe we don't normally discuss so much the fiber space, but maybe you can tell us a little bit of the thinking there, and if it's also a sourcing issue or if it's more easy to have a marketing impact and so forth.
Yeah, so textiles in relation to food. Something that we've been saying a lot at Matera recently is it feels that textiles and fashion are, I would say, a few years behind the food space when it comes to regenerative agriculture sourcing commitments. It's there, but I think we saw the buzz first in food, and topics such as, for example, insetting also there seems to be a bit of a lag. So some leading companies are more actively exploring or already like launching some clothing lines with regenerative fibers, but they are definitely the leading ones. So it's happening, but I think food has set the example, maybe. One thing that I have learned in this realm of work is, I think before I entered into this field of work, I, like many of us, held very naive assumptions about thinking about large corporations and large companies in the world and asking, why can't they just switch to sourcing from good farmers? Why can't they just switch immediately to sourcing from sourcing more responsibly? And so I've learned a lot more about just how tremendously complex supply chains in a lot of different areas, but certainly in textiles are, that it is very rare that a company that sources fiber will actually source it from an actual farmer. So typically, for example, cotton goes first to a gin, then it goes to a mill, and typically then, the fabric is woven. So a company that makes clothing most likely purchases, if not ready-made garments, at least fabric. So the connection between the brand, making textiles, and the farmer is often very, very, there's little visibility to the level of farmer. So it is just extremely complex, and it takes a lot more than goodwill and best intentions on the part of textile company to start shifting their commitments. So that is one thing. Another thing that I have learned is when it comes to fashion, particularly, I would say luxury brands in particular, something like design is a hugely important factor. And in choosing materials, often the driver, the primary driver might just be like the feel of the fabric or the way it drapes, and only secondarily sustainability concerns. So that's another thing that slows down the decision making within a given company, unfortunately. So even if, so let's say the sustainability department sustainability director of a textile company might be really, really committed to moving the company towards supporting regenerative agriculture, sourcing from regenerative farms in some way. But if the design department and procurement and sustainability are not all aligned, those decisions will take a long, long time if they happen at all. So those are some of the unique features, I suppose, of the textile industry. Also, it is a really global industry. So unlike the European food industry, there's a lot of sourcing from your country or from the neighboring countries. In the case of cotton, it hardly grows in Europe. So we're talking about much longer distances to where your materials come from.
And do you see it picking up as of lately, or it's rather cutting costs right now in the industry?
Well, both. I see the will and the interest picking up for sure. So a lot of large textile companies, fashion companies want to be able to make same kinds of commitments because they all have their 2030 goals. They all need to reduce emissions, and the kind of those risks that Kuhn you spoke to of just very on a very basic level, supply risk, climate risk, and then also reputational risk. Companies know that they need to be taking these into consideration. So there's that impetus. But I would say there's still the budgets that many sourcing departments work with don't leave a lot of margin for supporting farmers, unfortunately. And it's a lot of different pieces, a lot of will of different players has to come together to make it happen.
Oh, thanks very much for that opening of that context and how it's developing. Maybe next to Gero, who, as you told us, are working with some of the earliest and most renowned and integral pioneers of the French-speaking world on conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and so forth. And they have, like Frédéric Thomas, Sarah Singler, and so forth, have been doing a lot of work in distributing the knowledge that they co-evolved. Maybe you can tell us a little bit on how you feel that knowledge is being resourced and if its demand is kind of picking up as of lately, and if you are asked more and more to help other farmers in other supply chains to follow on the path of regeneration.
So for me, the knowledge is there for a long time because we have a lot of pioneer farmers from all around the world and not just in Europe. But I think France is one of the best for the conservation agriculture, and they are sometimes, I think, they have a lot of the pioneers are there for the moment. And when you see with the Germany or France is clearly the best one for the moment. And I think we see an increase of demand of farmers to have the access to this knowledge, but the issue it's often who you are able to provide this knowledge and to really help farmers. So often you have to be in the field with them, you have to do it with them. So it's time consuming. And we need more agronomists on farms and on the ground that really know what we are doing. And because this is the biggest issue, we have a lot of younger agronomists or farmers that can help, but you need time to be good at it and to help farmers. So I think for the moment, one of the issue is to have these good people and enough to help a lot of farmers. So I think one of the bottleneck is to try to design the best courses or the best way to help farmers. And but you need the commitment of the farmers that want to change, and I think as well from the supply chain, because I think for the cost of the change and the courses, and to help the farmers, to help all the agronomists around it, because often you have, when you look at the potato industry, so you have the plants, they're agronomists, but you have to teach them as well. And because you can have good farmers that change, but if the supply chain is not ready, or to make few change that really can help, and you have, I don't know, it's really to make the link between the industry and the farmers that maybe really need to be improved, and to match all the issue from the industry and from the farmers, because I understand that it's not the same, but we have to work really on that. And if we want to do at a big scale, because now we are less than 5%, I will say, and I think if 5, it's maybe too much. And if we want to have 40% of the farmers in 10 years or 15 years, we have a lot to do.
Yes, thank you. I mean, bringing just this question back again, you know, a lot of companies in the downstream value chain have agronomists. So maybe you think that teaching them better through the pioneering farmer could be a support for the farmers in those supply chains?
Yeah, I think because when you see these big companies, often they have to provide on 30,000 hectares. And if they say to the farmers, we will buy you potatoes or vegetables, and but you have to produce them like this, they will do it, and you have a huge impact. And you're not working alone, and because otherwise farmers can be the best at what they are doing, and but you will not make a big change. And because for the moment, no, it's changing, but if I take the vegetables and the pea for the frozen markets, I think it's 8,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares in Belgium. Under contract, you have to plow, and so you are not able to do in a regen way, and so you have to start with that from the industry and from the farmers, and to bring them all together to build something, because otherwise it will be hard to come with something and to do a real change and have a real impact.
Thanks, Jero. Yeah, I think that's almost a perfect transition to Stefania. I wanted to ask also, I mean, now you said a little bit, you think we are at 10-15%. Jero now said he believes we are not even at 5%. I must honestly admit, and we wrote in our papers too, I think we're more at 5%, around 5% in some terms. But you recently published a report and kind of are collecting the results in the pilot schemes of the companies participating in yours, and maybe you could share a little bit on how it's in the best cases working to educate the agronomists in the supply chain. What are the results that the indicators that are looked at, and how it's kind of growing over time, if there's some exponential increase or if it's farmer by farmer and linear.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Simon. And I'm not sure about my 10%. I didn't fact check before joining, but effectively, for me, what's important is the overall goal. If you want to stay within planetary boundaries, is that at least we need 40% of production. And I think a rough estimate, again, would love to be corrected, but I think a rough estimate for Europe agricultural land is around 40 million hectares. And I think it was very interesting to hear what we're hearing about the different motivations from actors in the value chain to engage in the transition and engage in ultimately supporting or incentivizing the transition. And I think my most engaged members definitely see the supply chain risks. As Ro was saying, the potato industry is very clear. We see a less productive potato industry due to soil health, to soils being degraded, and also climate change. So we can see it. Some companies have started to do risk analysis that see what is the cost of inaction. What happens if I don't do anything? If I don't, and they see the physical risks and the cost that it will cost for them. So then, as it's material, that's when they say, okay, I need to act. What I still find very difficult is that the scale and size that we need to act upon then ultimately pushes back the question on, okay, but what is the investment case? Am I investing in the renovation of my neighbor's building just to make it, just to have am I just investing in the renovation of paint of someone else's house? Or what is ultimately then my return on investment? Though it's clear for the supply chain risks, and whenever it's about asking your chief financial officer, can you please unlock this very large amount of sum? I have to admit that then the question comes back and back on, okay, but how will I valorize and what return on investment will I choose to my company? And that's where all conversations that you might also be aware of. Can nature be valorized in the balance sheet of companies, or can investments in agriculture be valorized in the balance sheet, are still very important conversations and bottlenecks for agribusinesses that are part of it. And I also agree with what you were saying. Is I think the textile sector and mainly all sectors that are further away, so further steps away from the agricultural than food sector, they're still a little bit farther behind. And of course, they see less the material impact. So, of course, a textile company on wool, leather, cashmere, and probably also cotton starts to see it, but still they also sometimes approach it differently. And they approach it also from a compliance risk. I have been asked to reduce my carbon footprint in my value chain. And so how do I reduce what some people call your scope 3 emissions? So the emissions that don't come from my factory or from my operations, but come from the ingredients that I source. And so how do I reduce these emissions? Because I'm actually ultimately also responsible for them because I'm buying the products. And so they come with this angle. And it's a little bit of a provocative, but to them, I always tend to say there is no net zero in agriculture without regenerative agriculture, which means there is no net zero in agriculture. There's no path to a net zero to decarbonize your value chain if you don't take a holistic approach, because if you don't put back nature in the system, then you actually are unable to reduce the synthetic inputs that are actually mostly responsible that have a strong component that can to reduce the CO2 emissions. And there is this is not me who is saying it, there is a beautiful graph from Johan Rockström that showcases how to get really on the 1.5 degree pathway, the importance of bringing back nature and actually the potential reduction that comes from reducing synthetic inputs in agriculture. So that's where a little bit, I would say, on motivations I hear from my companies, and so it's not completely coherent. And when you were asking me, Simon, what is the role that companies are now playing maybe, and how are they supporting? I'm by no means an expert here, but I can say a few trends that I'm seeing. First of all, many agribusinesses are starting their programs, so they're supporting farmers with longer term contracts, so that this allows to support farmers during the transition. There is, in these longer term contracts, there is often a price premium and a bonus that is a benefit to valorize to support, to incentivize farmers for the adoption of a holistic basket of practices. And the more practices you adopt, usually then you go the steps up. So it's like a rewarding scheme. And there is already a challenge to align these rewarding schemes, because effectively there is no such thing as a potato farmer, but a farmer has a holistic basket of crops, that better than me, and so we need to look at a whole farm transformation and not a single crop transformation. And so it's long-term contracts where we have what I call for lack of a better word, price premiums. And then some actors are also making partnerships with banks where they're guaranteeing to get access to loan at a better rate. And so to try to bring in or insurance products at a better rate, like Farmers First Loss insurance products. So this is a little bit emerging, but we're seeing some of these coming up. But what I would love to have a conversation with you, which is also the name of the game here, is I think there's some disjointed and discattered incentives that are in the system today and that the farmer can maybe reach out to. But what's very complicated is, first of all, there's some competing ones that you can, and so you need to choose which ones you apply for. But how can we create like comprehensive farmers financing packages so that it's easy to access, and it gives you access to incentives, but to technical assistance, as you were saying, to a multitude of services, and that's something we as a coalition would really like to work on. And for example, because Simon was talking about it, we're just currently now in the moment, so it's not public yet. I'm gonna see the results probably in a few weeks. We're doing a mapping of the transition costs and of public and private incentives in place for multiple crops across 12 countries in Europe. We interviewed Simon for that, I think, and yeah, so we're very much looking forward to see if this very analytical and granular data will help us understand effectively where are the incentives in place, which are, and how can we start to package them so that they are easier to access to farmers. And last point on technical assistance, by no means an expert, but what I can say from companies' programs, they peer-to-peer learning networks, and so demo farms and are some of the tools that they're using, but they also see it as, you know, how can we ensure independent agronomic advice that supports farmer as really a key ask, because today there are a lot of agronomists out there, but with vetted interest. And so how do you actually ensure that you also can provide farmers at a regional landscape level with independent agronomic advice is definitely also seen as a key challenge. I hope I answered partly your question, Simon.
Yeah, I think you went on a great straight, and yes, I think we have still some meters to make with that report, and best of luck of finding that data, and I hope we can contribute. Before giving it to Anders, maybe just to frame, you mentioned both the words holistic quite a few times, and also net zero. I think for Cone it's also a topic of heart, kind of seeing what we don't see in net zero, even kind of the most abundant greenhouse gas, water vapor, and small water cycles, and how that's playing out in global burning and our floods and droughts and so forth. And of course, I'm interested in Anders, and I think we all are. As you lined out, you worked with supply chains and then kind of decided against working with the bigger supply chains. And I think you can also give us a little bit of a perspective of what you think of holistic management. What is that? And how that differentiates of KPIs in supply chain that monitor improving results of soil health and so forth.
Well, that's the mouthful. One of the important things that we are working with is understanding the farmer context. And as we're talking now, we're talking about scaling regenerative agriculture, and that is a very, very diverse story. Some farmers most farmers are smallholders, and then we have big corporate farms, and you need a very different strategy, a very complex strategy. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm sitting here now is how the transition of agriculture up through history has been a rather linear process, where we have gone from very complex system down to very simple linear farming systems. and that can be done very efficiently. But what we're about to do now is we're going to go from linear, simplified farming up to highly complex farming. And I think we need some time doing that. And as a farmer, and with all the farmers that I've been working with, trust is sort of the main currency. And at this moment in history, we are now sort of turning the tables. Many of you probably have the experience of being in the schoolyard, and there's like the big cool kids who have no issue with they have no problem with bullying you, and then at some point suddenly they turn around and they want to be your best friend, and that's a very strange situation to be in. And I think many farmers are feeling that now, as what had been one of their main obstacles, having a livelihood as a farmer, are now something that we are teaming up with. So there's a lot of reconciliation that needs to be done, and also a lot of trust building that needs to be done. And from my perspective, there's a need to grow this movement, and as we often talk about in our meetings with regenerative farmers, is the principle of hurrying slowly. And we need to take time in order to build this capacity. And one of the things that I like about the regenerative movement is that it will happen regardless, because it's something that is motivated from the farmers from the ground up. So it will just keep on going. And then there is the industry push in order to scale regenerative farming. And many farmers, and me including, are reluctant when it comes to scaling, because we feel the complexity on our bodies out on the land, and know all the small details that may turn the system on itself, making the walls cave in. So having that sense of urgency, while same time doing it with as much sensitivity as possible, I think it's important. And at the same time, one of the key principles here in Norway, when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, we're just taking back an old expression, which probably many of you know, where we say it's your mandate as a farmer is to leave the farm in a better state than it was when you inherited it. And for us, that's the bridge that we are building when we're talking with conventional farmers. That's the essence of regenerative agriculture. So when we're talking with farmers one-to-one, this is clear, and we have points where we can measure this and see the progress, because it's in the farmer's self-interest to see this progress. But when we're going up into an industry scale push, we need that accountability to work on a much higher level. And that's what is promising when it comes to scaling regenerative agriculture. And one of the key principles of regenerative agriculture is that it needs to be measured. It needs to be outcome-based. And the work now developing the metrics that can measure the whole complexity of the farming system, that is probably one of the most important works that is being done now. And while also building the bridge to farmers and building that trust again. So yeah, I don't know if I hit any of your questions, but it was a try.
I think also it was a beautiful kind of evolution in our discussion, from starting with the context, and now we'll go a little bit into differentiation, I think. And that was a great start. And I would like to go, before coming back to Mari, back to Stefania right away, in terms of, we touched upon it before, yes, sourcing and the acknowledgement that it's a key business interest that I keep resilience in my supply chain, to have some sourcing of cash crops to process, is decisive. And I think you also said that the further down you are from the producer, for example, retailers, seem to me much slower in picking up that need than, for example, Nestle or Unilever or McCain, kind of the more direct grower relationships the company has, the more they are aware of that need. And then also even further away, after the retailers, at some point come the shareholders. So I feel we see a switch, and I would like to have your opinion and observation on that. We have kind of a cohort of purpose CEOs, so the Fabers, the Polmans, the Schneiders, which are being replaced by something that one might call the pitbull CEOs, which with an even harder indoctrination of the importance of the next quarterly result and the stock price. And maybe you can share your own observation on how that is balancing out right now and what capacities these companies have in actually doubling down on their promises. If we take Nestle for an example, who wanted and puts 1 billion into regenerating supply chains, but now the person who made that possible is framed as having decided far from optimally.
Thank you, Simon, for the question. So also thinking about how I can share personal. Sorry, I have my kid coming to see me. And for you, so reflecting on how I can best respond to this question, because that could be also personal constraints. If we take a step back, that was my question when I was saying the current economic model is still very much geared towards short-term profits and short-term results. That's a little bit how especially public listed companies work. And that is definitely a very big tension, because we were talking about it before. To invest in the resilience of even companies' value chains, we need long-term contracts over 7 years. We need companies committing, as for example, Nestle did on 1 billion, like a big budget over multiple years. And so there is definitely a short-term versus long-term reflection, and and tension that is definitely still there, and this is still very much part of the system. I would say, and this is where you see in companies leadership and appetite for sustainability, of course, depends also very much. It's a personal leadership question. What I can say, is that the current CEO of Nestle was just been appointed, Laurent Frex. He actually has a very strong appetite for leadership, and one of the things that he has asked is that his the person responsible for global ESG actually reports directly into him. So I think this is still quite like, for example, one of those companies where you can see also positive trends. But I would say the tension about shareholders' short-term interest versus global business resiliency are still there. And maybe linked to that, one of the things that we were talking about, we're always seeing that the current agricultural system is probably not working to its optimal, is not working at its optimal, and that's why so many, for supply chain risks, that's why so many companies are investing. But when we were thinking about really investing in large scale, we talked about what's the investment case, and so ultimately, how do different value chain actors share the risks and the cost of the transition, and how ultimately this is also valorized to consumers. So I think the fact that we haven't still completely unlocked consumer demand valorization is definitely a point of questioning. There are many things out there. There is a stream on certification, there is a stream not on it. So I think that also plays an important role to really be able to unlock large-scale investments. Is what is my return on investments? Either we have put in nature and investments in agriculture, to put it bluntly, on the balance sheet. And someone was asking in the chat, sorry, I'm a little bit short-sighted, so I'm not monitoring. Please do raise your hand, and if I forgot to answer one of your questions. But you were asking about who's bearing the cost of MRV as we're shifting from more of a practice-based to a results-based farming model. as my former predecessor speaker was saying, which is very, very true. What we're doing is this has a cost if we start to monitor. And I know EARA is doing a lot of impressive work also as trying to identify a cost-effective MRV model. And so what are the proxies that are needed? And this is very, very much needed because to implement a cost-effective MRV system at scale, it needs to be cost-effective. That's for sure. And we aren't there yet today. And so the current system is not scalable at where it is, and so this is definitely a huge. I see at least a huge sector where a lot of innovation is needed to make it cost effective, and so that's a little bit my thoughts. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think also just to finish up on a little bit on your last thoughts, also monitoring practices is extremely costly. We often forget that. Today was a report released in Germany on the costs of bureaucracy, and I haven't really looked into the parts of agriculture, but if we look into public regulation and subsidies of agriculture, and that all being practice-based, basically, there's a loss of human resource cost involved in that. I wanted to go to Mary, kind of, I think you're bridging two experiences, also understand a little bit, we have to understand the heterogeneity of farms, from smallholder farms to big financialized corporate farms, so to say, while at the same point, if we try to stay a little bit with the thought that the further down the value chain our actors are, the less aware they are for the already painfully materializing climate risks, so to say. So you work both with smallholder all the way, let's say, to a fashion retailer. Maybe you can connect the dots a little bit.
That's a fun challenge. I mean, it comes down to connection, right? That is something that culturally and at this time in human history, we've sort of lost that on so many levels. The connection between what we are consuming or using and where it comes from. And it's a huge passion of mine to find ways to recreate those connections. So yeah, when it comes to textile industry, the gap is quite significant. And I think when there's a difference between food and textiles in that for most people, the idea of planting some seeds and growing some carrots doesn't seem out of this world. It's only doable, but the craft and the different steps involved in making cloth feel like it's such an expert knowledge to spin yarn, to weave cloth, to make garments. Most of us don't have that knowledge, so it feels like it's out there. So that's why I think many consumers feel, even more than eaters, as consumers of clothing, we feel like I don't understand where this comes from, and I never will. So there's more of a disconnect between what we wear and where it comes from, where the fibers come from. That's one thing. So brands, retailers, and then brands are, of course, in the middle. And I think they play a huge role, or ideally should play a huge role, in finding ways to recreate that connection between what we wear and where the fibers come from. There are a few ways in which, although we've talked about the challenges of facilitating that connection and making actual sourcing of regenerative materials happen in a way that supports regenerative farmers, there are a few ways, for the lack of a better word, we'd call them levers, that can affect change. So one of them, Stefania, you mentioned it, was MRV and data. So companies do need data at this point to stay compliant. They need to communicate about their impact. So that is one way in which it does come into their, it's part of, doing business in today's world, to be able to map that out and report that into the world. So that is one piece where regenerative agriculture can find like a hook. Like if we can record this, the improvements, the impact, it should be of great interest to you. So for example, at Matera, we do MRV and we have a data platform. So the cotton comes accompanied by data about its impact. And yes, to do it well is resource intensive and human labor intensive. We don't automate it all, so it's a lot of in-field collection. But that is one thing. I would say data is one lever. Story is another one, because increasingly the power of a really good story, if it can be connected to farmers, like real life human beings who grew the crop that you are now wearing, in case of textiles, it has power. And of course, textile and fashion companies are very attuned to what is the story that their customers are looking for. So if we can offer a compelling story about how the consumers or their brands impact affects real life people, in this case farmers and their communities, that's another one, another way to pull brands and companies into this work. And third one is carbon. I mean, it's related to the data again, and I think as much as many of us want to avoid the carbon tunnel vision, it is a kind of currency that does mobilize more than some other ways of talking about impact too. And so that is one way to sort of create interest or create traction among companies. If you can convey the value proposition, and if you can demonstrate the impact in terms of emissions or carbon sequestration. So maybe I'll pause there. Again, I don't know if I really answered the question, but those were the first thoughts that came to my mind.
I think you lined it out great, and you remember me a lot to our friends of the Producers Trust, who I think are trying to do very similar work, and starting with smallholders, education, data, and then to stories. I wanted to come to Cohen in a thought of, we are talking a lot about green hushing and greenwashing. We're talking now even about pharma washing. It came up in the chat, and I think with Regeneration certifications and claims and so forth, really growing in uptake immensely. Where do we want to kind of draw, let's say, soft boundaries into what are minimum standards of what needs to be observed and validated to see a regeneration journey happening on a land? And where do we say it's just greenwashing? But as a little seaweed, I want to bring in a thought of, are there some kinds of greenwashing that might be better than green hushing, because they kind of start positive feedback loops of people having a mindset shift and committing more towards doing more for and with nature in the future? So that might have been a lot again to you, Cohen. Maybe as two practical examples, we can see JBS doing 60 billion of revenue annually, basically by cutting down the rainforest and feeding it in feedlots, or having animals in feedlots, while then having a $10 million program on Regenerative. Or we see a progressive, let's say, a company committing some part of their money into longer term programs, while overstating a little bit the goals which they want to achieve, but then continuing on that goals. And I want to know, where do you think, is there something like a net positive greenwashing in a journey kind of sense? And how do you see the impact on green hushing? Like, is it still increasing, or are we crowding it out?
What do you mean by green hashing? Sorry for my...
So by green hushing, I basically create a danger if I'm making green claims by being called out for
Okay,
greenwashing.
yes, exactly.
But if I say nothing, I will also not be called out, and my brand will not be known for doing greenwashing. I think that's a lot what happened, let's say, in voluntary carbon markets also.
I think a lot of other things happened in voluntary carbon
Yeah,
markets as well.
sure.
But that's a side note. I mean, I'm definitely not the right person to ask, like, what are the minimum things needing to be in place to be able to call something regeneration or not. I think we have many frameworks and many amazing farmers here and beyond this room that can answer that question way better. But I had to think of a discussion we often have in the investment world around regeneration, and which comes to farmland funds, which basically are funds that are set up to buy farmland and regenerate it, and can generate quite an interesting return. Of course, coming to a few of the conversations here before on family farms or smaller farms versus larger corporate farms, I'm making it black and white here. And one could argue that further intensification, let's say, of farmland, or the centralization of farmland into hands of fewer people, although that's hotly debated if that's the case, is not a good thing, even if they're regenerating. I don't know. I think we need both. I think it's the most developed piece of the regenerative agriculture, at least the investment side of things. It can absorb quite a bit of money. And a lot of people and a lot of things are done there at scale that we cannot do elsewhere because of generational shifts, because of sizes of farms, etc. Is it the solution to everything? Absolutely not. But a lot of people will get exposure to regeneration at scale. A lot of people will get trained, a lot of farm managers get trained that will leave and do other things afterwards. So I think there's an analogy there, like it's better than what most of the neighbors are doing. Is it the perfect solution? No, because farm ownership or farmland ownership is not in the hands necessarily of the stewards of the land. But there you have to look at what, I think in terms of impact, you have to look at what would the money have done else otherwise. Like, would it have invested in amazing things elsewhere? Probably not. So there's a conversation there about impact of that few hundred million in many cases. And second, what would the land have done elsewhere? Probably it would have been bought by the neighbor that is farming conventionally and grew a bit bigger, which is what we've seen in many of these large commodity markets. So just as a thought exercise, we're very early again too, and I think the bashing and hashing is another hashing not, but the bashing, absolutely, we have to be very strict in it. At the same time, we see a lot of people sticking their neck out to do things, risking not their careers, but definitely positions in larger corporates. And I want to definitely point out Anders what was saying before, like I can feel the tension of the farming community. This is not a relationship they've had before, and we're not even sure if this is an honest one. But I do know in 5 to 10 years, and in many crops already, we're going to need every farmer we can get to go through transition. So there is a weird tension, but it's also, yeah, there's a lot of damage that has been done in the last, in many cases, centuries, because of exploitation, because of commoditization, because of colonialism, etc. And there's a lot of trauma that we need to work through in the countryside. So with that tension, and we need to mention that, we need to discuss that. And I don't think there's space in, let's say, corporate shareholder updates about the trauma that they're working through with their supply chains. And there will be a lot of scandals and a lot of very clickable things in newspapers, and the hard work is going to be done underneath. It's not a really good answer to your question. I'm realizing, but I think we all see when life gets back on a farm, a piece of land. We can see when life gets back into a farm, and we have to figure out easy and cheap ways to measure that. But let's not over make this too complex as well. Like, it's not like we can see the beautiful fence line pictures left and right. We can feel and sense and even listen. If you just take an audio image in terms of insects, you get pretty far and see, is this better than a few years ago or not? And let's work from there.
Thank you very much. No, please don't apologize. I'm also asking not so good questions, that's for sure. I think you touched also on a very interesting topic, which is, I think, us in EARA all very much on the point, kind of, this kind of civilization and way we are living and farming right now was co-initiated by the enclosure of the commons. Now we are experiencing maybe the enclosure of the family farms. In many cases, I would give it back to Anders with a view on the time. We want to be utterly respectful of all of your times for having joined. So with these 6 minutes left, maybe Anders can come back and then to Joe.
Well, I'll pick up on one of the topics mentioned here. In our work with retailers here in Norway, we are approached by a lot of different companies and retailers in Norway. In our work, integrity is, that's why we exist as an organization in Regenerate Norway. One of the actors we have been working with, we have been very clear to them that we want them to understand their whole business as in a holistic context, thoroughly going through what are we providing, what's our portfolio of products that we are serving to the market, and within this portfolio, what is the lowest hanging fruit, considering regeneration of land and ecosystem and everything surrounding it. And we also agreed with them that the weird thing is when we're working with companies, it's always the sustainability CEO, the CEO for sustainability is always the same person as the marketing CEO. So they go apparently hand in hand. So we try to combat that by saying that if you want to work with us and use the term regeneration, we want you to show something. And only communicate through what you can show. And if we don't have any land to show for yet, we can show that through our work with farmers that we actually deliver on, and not focusing on the values, but what's actually being done, and also being transparent on how large of a percentage of our product portfolio is actually in the process of regeneration. Trying to keep that transparent and honest to the public. And some of the companies that we've been working with have been really cool about this and really laying low on the marketing side and just really taking responsibility into working with the farmers, giving free trainings, giving courses, MRV trainings, yeah, just about everything. And also building integrity and belonging to the whole movement of regeneration. And when that is done, we set a new culture, and I think that's vital for this to actually function. That we have a common culture. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. No, I'm also lobbying in new positions for executive boards in agri-food companies. I think Chief Strategy, Sustainability and Operations Officer would be a position that could be leading something that's necessary. Jerome, maybe you give us some final thoughts, and then maybe Anna can give us goodbye and maybe a short round of last words.
But I think with what we said tonight, it's something that we really need to do all together in a holistic way, and we really need to have the farmer at the center, and because everything that we are doing, it's like Anders said, it's in the details to move from the conventional farming to the regen farming. And so I think that we need to listen to farmers, and because we have a lot of the solutions, we don't have the solution, but I think we are part of it. And yeah, I think that's my final word for this. And
thank you, Jero. I don't know, Anna, yes.
Wonderful, everyone. What an interesting step of the conversation, because it's been coming a long time. And this is one more step in that ongoing conversation that we need to be in. So I want to thank everyone for really listening and really aiming to understand each other, because we need to. We're all part of the ecosystem. There's for sure resistances and difficulties. We all have our own. I have mine too. And so it's like listening to all these different voices just helps to understand better where everyone's coming from. So an invitation to continue these conversations and to continue to build that space together from all these different stakeholders, and also to support the farmers, the training of the farmers, and the journeys that they have, because at the end of the day, I was also at the Regenerative Agriculture Summit that was being commented in the chat. And this last year, in one of the working rooms, the companies there present after 2 hours concluded that they could not come to an agreement after 2 hours of discussion, but the farmers will sort it, so we're okay. And it's like, well, okay, but we need to support those farmers in doing that. So let's not put everything, all the weight on the shoulders of the farmers, and let's all build that ecosystem that's going to help them and not hinder them on their journey, which is one of the concerns that a lot of farmers have. We just need them, need the system to let us do our work. We know our farm, we know our context, and we need to be accompanied and understood in that. And a recommendation that Koen said actually in the chat as well was visit a farm. All the people in these companies and in all of the industry needs to go and put their boots on and visit a farm with a farmer to really understand what that life is like. And so with that, thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to post there in the chat the website of EARA and the LinkedIn as well. And yes, indeed, spend proper time, not just a quick visit, but a few days. And in fact, soon EARA will be coming up with a set of recommendations of farms around Europe that are regenerative farms that you can visit, whether with training programs or volunteer programs or whatever. So that's something that we strongly recommend to everyone. It's when you've spent a few days there, as you said, Koen, that you really get to understand what it's like to run a farm. And so how we need to support those roles instead of asking them to come up with all the solutions and also measure them and also prove themselves and also find the buyers, so we really need to support the whole ecosystem needs to support them. So I'd just like to ask our speakers, we could be here, a couple more hours talking. It's so enjoyable to listen to everyone so respectfully exchanging. And we've started to touch on some really interesting topics as well. Is there anything that our speakers would like to say to the room before leaving in like 20 seconds? Something that you feel, I'd really like to say before saying goodbye. Everyone had so much interesting stuff to say. Is giving the opportunity. If there's something else that you want to put in there.
No, I would say thank you and happy holiday season, because we are already in December. So thank you for having taken the time for this exchange, and looking forward to collaborating.
Definitely. Thank you. Anders?
I'll just say thank you to everybody for sticking their head out in this movement. It's tough work, and we're here for each other. So keep it going.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I would like to come back to the word trust and connection that was voiced this evening. And I think that is all fine ways to manifest those in our work and in our world.
Thank you so much for that, Mary. Over to you, Koen. Final word.
Go and visit the farm, spend time, work there. No, I already repeated that. Let's get to work.
Yes, indeed. The farmers are the heroes of the time. We need to support them and make them feel not so much like struggling heroes, but rather as part of something larger than themselves that we're supporting. So thank you so much, everyone. And such a shame to cut this short at this point, but in respect to everyone's time, let's do that. And let's know that as we speak, there are literally thousands and now hundreds of thousands of people working in this direction around the world. There's been some beautiful exchanges in the chat. There's people joining from Australia, from the other side of the world, from the States. This is an ongoing conversation that involves us all as a human community. So let's keep talking about this. No conversation is wasted. And whenever you speak to anyone, even in the shop, in the taxi, in the bus, you speak about this stuff, and we just need to all collectively raise awareness about the importance of a healthy and profitable food system for all parts involved. Thank you. Good evening. And go well and happy holidays.